Hello, everybody, and welcome back to RPG Reviews for Therapy. And today I'm going to be talking about the game Green Oaks. Tell you a little bit more about that in a second. My name is Dwight, and I am the host of the Broken Brain podcast and a clinical mental health counselor. I have been, over the last years or twos, have been experimenting with the use of role-playing games in therapy, and am giving a general review as well as a review for how you could use this RPG in therapy. Three real sections here to these reviews. If you've seen my other videos, you know. Talk about what the game is, how it's played, those dynamics and such. Talk about pros and cons that I noticed in playthrough, and talk about how it can be used for therapeutic purposes, self-growth, or in group therapies where I like to use a lot of these things, or to use it in your own. So let's dig into this really exciting RPG. I was really excited when I saw this one called Green Oaks. It's by Roberto de Luca. There's lots of different places you can get this. I like to get a lot of these indie games at drivethroughrpg.com. I'm not affiliated with them, but I'm sure there are some other places where you can get those. So this is the book. I know there are places online you can also buy the book. I actually got the PDF, and then I had it printed at a local printer down the street that I like to use. First of all, it's very interesting. You'll notice the front of it looks like a brochure for a retirement community. And oddly enough, that is what this is, the story of a retirement community with some extras. And when you look at the different pages, you'll notice this, Welcome to Green Oaks. And it talks all about the Green Oaks retirement community, nursing home, etc. Very, very cool. It looks very, very good. In fact, the printer who I got this from looked at it as I was checking out. It's all spiral bound and everything. And he's like, wow, this looks like a cool place, or whatever. He thought it was an actual brochure for that. And the use of the photography and showing older folks that are there. Now, here is the premise. Green Oaks nursing home, retirement community is awash with supernatural or alien or any other type of ghosty, monstery, fantasy-based thing that you can do. It gives you a really, really good bones and framework to set up an adventure as the GM, to where you're going to have all sorts of kooky, crazy things happen. And you can either sort of go off book and plan a lot of your own thing, or it has some randomizers to help you in character design as well as how to design things. The inspirations for this would include movies like Bubba Hotep, and which should tell you a little bit about it right there. So when you are setting up this game, the way that the dynamics work is that instead of the use of dice, you are using playing cards. And I used a deck of playing cards, the Navigators brand, which has some cool designs and such. And so what you're doing is you remove the I think it's just the 10s and 9s, 8s as well. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But then you're going to draw cards each time. It uses what is called a trump card. It's basically based somewhat off of bridge, I guess, but basically instead of rolling dice, when you're going to do something that requires an uncertain outcome or whatever, you pull a card. And depending on what kind of card you get, if it's from the trump suite, it's basically a success. If it's a face card versus a numbers card, it's a different type of success. If it's not from the trump suite, then it's a failure. And there are different kinds of failures and different things you can do about that. You are given options. If you have a failure, there are some failures that allow you to grumble and complain about something. And there are other ones that require you to grumble or complain about something. And there are just other little things you can choose to do. If you find yourself if you have enough failures and you've grumbled enough, then you might have a full-blown, outburst. And if you have too many of those, you might have to physically rest from all of the emotional output that you have. So there are some things that are designed around some of the identity that is often associated with a senior citizen or someone in a retirement community with a lot of those types of frustrations. And so that's another part, is your character is a member of this retirement community, and you design your character according to this. They are going to be a former, fill in the blank, a retired, fill in the blank, with a hobby of fill in the blank. So they could be like a former uh, Marine who's a retired welder and has a hobby of eavesdropping or something like that. It could be anything. There are those that are a former serial killer, for example, who's a retired, could be a retired baker, could have a hobby of knitting, so you have all kinds of things. Depending on how you want to GM the game, there's an option to essentially have people pick these kind of things. But the game itself in the booklet has randomized tables to where you can start out by drawing cards and it will tell you. For example, here's one with the Seven of Hearts, where you could be a former executioner who's a retired counselor and you have a hobby of aromatherapy. So, it'll package those things up. So you can do whatever kind of, you could do a variation of that if you wanted to blend those as well. The other thing that's interesting for the GM is that these exact same pages, along with saying these former retireds, for the GM, there's themes that you're going to have here as well. So if you're setting up the adventure and you're stymied or you just need some ideas, for example, here's one, the Jack of Hearts. If you pull that one, the theme options it suggests are thieves, millennials, a magic cube. The King of Hearts has circus, giant lobsters, animated objects. There's ghosts, pineal glands, Bolsheviks. Anyway, there's all kinds of things that are put in here. Very, very clever to give you kind of thought starters as you are planning your adventure with that. So let's look at some of the pros and cons of the game. I'm going to say heavily weighted on pros. Did a playthrough of this for a podcast recording, which, by the way, you can find links to that if you go to the Broken Brain podcast. There's that. If you go to my YouTube channel, which you're on right now, or if you just go to dwighthurst.com/RPG, you can view we recorded the entire live play session. And you can also see a short video on how I designed the specific game using this, as well as these reviews and other reviews that I've done. So the pros and cons of this game. The pros are it is certainly fun. There's a fun aspect to the gameplay to when you're drawing cards, and just mixes it up a little bit if you're used to dice and such, and gets you thinking a little differently. I love the randomizers and the tables they have to help with character development. I love how it helps with GMing. And the at least the tone of it is that you're encouraged to get creative. This is definitely one of those games. As far as it not in the design, there are not hit points, and you don't have people get killed or whatever necessarily. Although you can impose sanctions, it's very flexible. But it's also one of these. It's much more about narrative and drive, and I really like that. I'll mention a little bit about that when I mention about how it can be used therapeutically. It really, really gets the mind going. It's also a population that you don't see represented in RPGs very much. Maybe there are individual characters here and there, but to have an entire game that takes place with all the characters being senior citizens, I find that that's really, really cool and diversifies the experience. So that's another pro. Another pro is that it was inexpensive, being an indie game. Also, just very well designed, good art in the booklet, and also it was quite easy to establish the rules and to move forward with that. Now that makes me into just a couple of the cons. There's not many, to be honest with you. One of the cons is that some people might find it to be a little it's definitely teasing towards this chapter of life. There's a couple of places I found it to be mostly respectful. There's a couple of places and dynamics that lean into making fun of the elder chapter of life a little bit, but personally I didn't find it to be bad, but some people might. You just want to be aware of how you utilize those, especially if you have players who might be in that chapter of life. You just might want to feel that out. Not a big con, but the other one is that with the attributes you get advantages on your draws when you draw cards and such. So if you're a former blank, your hobby is blank, retired blank, if you have attributes that you can tie back and convince the GM that tie back to that, just like most games, you get advantage. One of the cons that I found was, me and the players, as we prepped for this, and especially one of them who read the whole book, we were unable to really figure out exactly the advantage. There's some indication that in some cases you don't have to draw if you can tie it to those, but then the language was a little confusing because it seemed like you did have to draw other times. So we ended up just doing a mod to that a little bit and drawing 2 cards if you had a strong talent to it. So maybe it was just we were not clever enough to figure out where that was in the book, but I do feel like we went through the book quite a bit and didn't quite find that. If anybody, you can leave in the comments if you found out how to do that. I would love to hear that, because that will help with other plays. So the con would be that either isn't there or it was a little confusing to find. Maybe that's user error on my part as the GM in that situation. That's very possible. The implications for using this for therapy are really, really cool, actually. As I've stated before, when I'm approaching therapeutic interventions, I like to use games that were not designed for that. They were designed for enjoyment, because studies have shown that if you're gamifying therapy or self-growth, doing something that is designed for self-growth primarily is not as effective as doing something that is enjoyable. Number one, because you often won't do it if it's designed only for that. Now, having a little adaptation and things is helpful here as well. I'll give you an example. So first of all, with it being with this phase of life, there's a lot of things that it naturally brings up with your own mortality, and also just the idea of having vitality and having purpose at a time of life where sometimes we don't like to think about it. We're nervous about getting older. There's just fears and things that go on with that. But the idea of playing a character who is still efficacious and empowered and able to do things and solve mysteries and fight monsters and such, that's actually really, really healing, I find. And now, one modification that I made as a therapist planning it was I had everybody who was playing come up with what was their character's one of their biggest successes as they look back at their life and one of their biggest regrets. And we didn't do a ton with that on this one, but you could, since it was just an example, but you could utilize that, especially if you prep someone, if you prep yourself too, to say, I want to make that representative of something I want to work through. So it really lent itself to a lot of different psychological aspects, and I'd say self-growth as well is something. And I will say that one of the players I approached afterwards let me know that they actually experienced that they felt some psychological benefit, particularly from the grumbling dynamic, where they were able to sort of, just kind of bitch about stuff that didn't go well in the game. You have an advantage if you were able to complain about something specific or about how a thing didn't go right. And they found that to be very freeing, and for them, it touched something inside themselves. So once again, this is the great thing about RPGs that I love, is even if you're just playing them, the act of playing a character, creating a character, problem solving, and actually communicating with a team is healthy in and of itself. So once again, I would highly recommend, for therapeutic or personal, play or whatever, Green Oaks by Roberto de Luca. You can Google search it or go to places like indie outlets that have these. Please feel free to go to dwighthurst.com/RPG to see some of the work I'm doing, as well as I've been updating that lately with some of the upcoming RPG groups that I'm going to be doing for therapy, for those that are interested in joining those, or if you just like to listen to the podcast. And it's not exclusively about RPGs. We talk about everything that has to do with psychology and culture, and that's on The Broken Brain, or right here on the YouTube channel. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you